The manager deliberately made the farmer wait, unaware that he owned the bank. The branch manager looked at the man in dusty work boots and a flannel shirt sitting in the lobby and said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear, "Tell him we are with priority clients right now. He can wait." His assistant nodded, straightened her blazer, and walked back to the waiting area to deliver the message. The man in the flannel shirt looked up at her, said nothing, and folded his hands in his lap. He had been sitting there for 37 minutes. He had nowhere else to be. And he had all the patience in the world because patience was the one thing 41 years of farming had given him in a quantity that never ran dry. His name was Clifford Dale Harmon, and the manager who had just made him wait had no idea that the building they were both sitting in, the carpeted lobby, the frosted glass, the leather chairs, every single square foot of it, belonged to him. Before this story goes any further, drop a like and tell me in the comments, have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? Because what happens next is something that Branch never forgot. Clifford Harmon did not look like a man who owned anything beyond what fit in a pickup truck. He was 63 years old, wide through the shoulders, with the kind of hands that made people at church dinners ask if he needed help opening jars, and he always said no because it was true. He wore the same 4 shirts in rotation, all flannel, all bought at the same farm supply store on the edge of Millhaven, and he drove a 1994 Ford F-250 that he had no intention of replacing because it started every morning, and that was the only qualification a truck needed. People who did not know him assumed he was a hired hand. People who did know him understood that assumption was part of how he had gotten where he was. He had grown up on land his grandfather had homesteaded in eastern Tennessee, on a ridge where the soil was thin, and the winters were long, and nothing came easy enough to make a man careless. His father had farmed it the same way his grandfather had, and Clifford had farmed it the same way his father had, until the year he turned 28, and decided that farming the same way as the generation before him was a guarantee of ending up with the same results they had. So he started reading accounting books from the library in town, agricultural economics from a correspondence course he paid for in installments. He read about commodity futures, about land trusts, about the mechanics of rural lending. He read with the methodical patience of a man who knows he is teaching himself something he cannot afford to get wrong. The first expansion came when he was 34. A neighboring farm of 240 acres came available when the owner's health failed and the sons had no interest in working it. Clifford bought it with a loan he had spent 2 years building the credit profile to qualify for, and he paid it off in 4 years instead of 15. The second expansion came at 39, the third at 44. By the time he was 50, he owned 1,100 acres across 3 counties, ran a beef cattle operation that had contracts with 2 regional distributors, and leased tillable acreage to 3 younger farmers who he charged below market rates because he remembered what it felt like to be young and undercapitalized and looking at land that other men owned. None of that was visible from the lobby of First Cornerstone Bank on a Tuesday morning when he walked in, wearing the flannel shirt and the dusty boots and carrying a manila envelope under his arm. If you have never seen someone be dismissed before they even open their mouth, you have never sat in a bank lobby in a small city wearing the clothes of a man who works with his hands. The receptionist had smiled at him with the particular smile that exists in the space between welcome and assessment, and asked if he had an appointment. He said he did with the branch manager, confirmed the day before. She asked him to take a seat and said she would let Mr. Preston know. That was at 9:13 in the morning. By 9:50 he was still in the chair. Nathan Preston was 41 years old and had been branch manager of the Millhaven location of First Cornerstone for 3 years. He was the type of man who organized his desk before leaving every evening and arrived early enough to reorganize it in the morning. He had a way of tilting his head slightly when listening to someone he considered beneath his time that he himself did not notice, but that everyone around him had catalogued. He had been told about the walk-in in the waiting area, described as a farmer, older, no tie, manila envelope, and he had made the decision without leaving his office that this was not a priority situation. He told his assistant Gretchen to let the man know he was with someone and would be available shortly. Shortly in Nathan Preston's vocabulary was elastic. At 9:52, Gretchen came back to the office and told him the man in the lobby had been waiting almost 40 minutes and was asking quietly if there was a better time to reschedule. Nathan said, "Tell him 5 more minutes," and went back to the quarterly report he had been reviewing, which was not urgent but felt more productive than whatever conversation was waiting for him in a flannel shirt. The 5 minutes became 10. At 10:03, Nathan finally walked out to the lobby, extended his hand with the smile he used for situations he had already categorized, and said, "Mr. Harmon, I apologize for the delay. Why don't we step into my office?" He said it the way people say things when the apology is procedural rather than genuine. Clifford stood, shook his hand once, and followed him down the hall without a word. Nathan sat behind his desk and opened with the standard questions. "Nature of your visit today. How can we assist you? If there was anything you were looking to discuss about your accounts." He asked them in the smooth sequence of someone managing a meeting he expected to be brief. Clifford set the manila envelope on the desk, folded his hands on top of it, and said he was there to discuss a proposal related to the bank's regional acquisition interests. Nathan blinked. It was a small thing, involuntary, but Gretchen, who had followed to take notes, noticed it and looked down at her pad. Nathan said he was not sure he followed, that perhaps Clifford was thinking of the corporate offices in Knoxville, that branch locations did not typically handle that category of conversation. Clifford said he was aware of that, and that was why he had requested a meeting with the branch manager rather than a teller, because what he had in the envelope was something that needed to go through the right channel, and he wanted to put it in the right hands directly. He said it with a flatness that contained no aggression and no performance, just the statement of a man who knew exactly what he was carrying and where it needed to go. Nathan reached for the envelope with the careful movements of someone who has decided to humor a situation. He opened it and removed the document inside, and for the first 3 seconds his expression did not change because his mind had not yet processed what his eyes were reading. Then the processing caught up, and the expression did change, though not in any dramatic way, just a kind of stillness that replaced the managed ease that had been there before. He read the first page again, turned to the second, came back to the first. The document was a shareholder summary from Cornerstone Agricultural Holdings, the parent company of First Cornerstone Bank. The name on the summary, listed as the majority private shareholder of record, was Clifford Dale Harmon of Mill Haven, Tennessee. Nathan set the document down on the desk very slowly, the way a person sets something down when they need a second to decide what to do with their hands. The story of how Clifford Harmon came to own the majority stake in the bank, where he had just spent 40 minutes waiting in a lobby chair, was not a dramatic story. It did not involve insider knowledge or financial strategy of the kind that makes headlines. It involved the same thing that had built every other piece of what he owned: time, patience, and the willingness to act when other people hesitated. 15 years earlier, Cornerstone Agricultural Holdings had been a small regional investment group formed by 3 men from eastern Tennessee who believed that rural banking was being systematically abandoned by larger institutions chasing urban markets. They were right about that. They were also undercapitalized, which is the condition that eventually ends most enterprises that are right about something. Clifford had met the founding partner at a cattle auction in Sevierville, and over 2 years of occasional conversation had come to understand what the company was trying to do and why it was struggling to do it. When the opportunity came to participate in a private placement round, he had put in the kind of money that made the other investors in the room look at each other. He had put in that money because he had studied the underlying assets, the loan portfolios, the land values securing those loans, the demographic trends in rural lending, and he had concluded that the upside was real and the downside was manageable. He was not speculating. He was reading. Over the following decade, as other shareholders sold out or reduced their positions during the periods when the company's growth was slow and the urban banks were posting flashy numbers that made rural finance look dull by comparison, Clifford had held. When positions became available, he bought them, not quickly, not conspicuously, but consistently, the same way he paid off loans and built fence line and expanded the cattle operation, one deliberate step at a time. By the time Nathan Preston had been appointed branch manager of Mill Haven 3 years ago, Clifford Harmon held 53% of Cornerstone Agricultural Holdings. He had never called the branch. He had never introduced himself to the management team. He received his quarterly reports, read them carefully, called the corporate office in Knoxville when he had a question, and otherwise left the day-to-day operations to the people hired to manage them. He was the kind of owner who believed that the best thing a majority shareholder could do was hire good people and stay out of their way. The corollary to that belief was that when the people hired were not good, the majority shareholder had a responsibility to be present. The branch's customer satisfaction scores had been declining for 2 consecutive quarters. There had been 3 formal complaints in the past 8 months, all involving treatment of customers who the staff had assessed as low value on site. Clifford had read those complaint summaries in his quarterly packet and had done what he always did when he read something that concerned him. He had decided to see it for himself. So he had called and made an appointment, given his name, worn the flannel shirt, and sat in the lobby chair for 37 minutes, while Nathan Preston reviewed a non-urgent quarterly report in his office 15 feet away. Now Nathan was sitting across the desk from him, holding the shareholder summary, and the air in the room had shifted to the particular temperature that fills a space when a person realizes the ground they were standing on is not what they believed it was. Nathan said in a voice that had lost most of its managed ease that he had not been aware, that the corporate office had not communicated, that he would have, naturally. He would have ensured that Mr. Harmon was seen immediately. He would have personally. The situation in the lobby was not representative of how the branch operated. He wanted to assure Mr. Harmon of that. He said all of this in the slightly too fast way that people speak when the real sentence they are trying to say is, "I am sorry about what I am only now understanding that you just witnessed me do." Clifford listened without expression. When Nathan finished, he said, "I know you would have. That is the problem." Nathan went quiet. It was the kind of quiet that comes when a sentence lands in a way that the person who received it needs a moment to fully feel. Clifford picked up the shareholder summary from the desk, folded it once and placed it back in the manila envelope. He said he had not come to the branch to make a scene or to embarrass anyone. He had come because the complaints he had read in the quarterly packet described a pattern, and he had learned a long time ago that a pattern does not correct itself. It only becomes more visible over time. He said he would be in contact with the corporate office in Knoxville at the end of the week to discuss the branch's customer experience performance and the staffing decisions he thought needed to be reconsidered. He said this without a raised voice, without the emphasis that most people would have placed on the words to signal that they were consequential. The words were consequential. The tone was the same he used to discuss feed costs and lease renewals. He stood up, tucked the manila envelope under his arm, and said he appreciated Nathan's time. Nathan stood too quickly and said something about hoping they could find a way to address his concerns directly, that the branch took this very seriously, that he himself took it very seriously. Clifford said he was glad to hear it. He shook Nathan's hand once, nodded at Gretchen, and walked back down the hall toward the lobby. If you are still watching, tap like now, because what happened in that branch over the next 30 days is the part of this story that changed more than one person's life. The call to Knoxville came on Friday, as Clifford had said it would. He spoke for 22 minutes with the company's CEO, a man named Warren Fisk, who had known Clifford for 11 years, and who had the kind of relationship with him built on the understanding that when Clifford called with a concern, the concern was real, and the call was not the beginning of a long process of deliberation, but an indication that deliberation had already occurred. Warren listened, asked 3 questions, said he would handle it. Gretchen was the first to notice the change. She was 31 years old and had been at the branch for 4 years, long enough to understand the difference between institutional messaging and institutional meaning. The email from Knoxville that came the following Monday was formally worded and spoke of renewed commitment to service standards and branch-level accountability frameworks. But Gretchen had read enough of those emails to understand what lived underneath the language. She understood it clearly enough that she went home that night and updated her resume, not in a panic, but with the measured foresight of someone who sees a tide changing and decides to find higher ground before the water arrives. Nathan Preston was placed on a performance improvement plan 60 days after Clifford's visit. The plan was specific, the metrics were clear, and the timeline was not generous. He completed the plan and remained in his position, but in the way a man remains in a room after the furniture has been rearranged, present but aware that the arrangement is no longer his to determine. He was a careful man and a capable administrator, and those qualities were enough to keep him employed, but not enough to restore the confidence of a majority shareholder who had spent 40 minutes in a lobby chair while he reviewed a non-urgent report. Some losses are permanent, not because of what they cost, but because of what they reveal. Clifford did not think about Nathan Preston very often. He was not the type to carry satisfaction about outcomes, the way some men carry grievance about injustice. Both feelings, in his assessment, were luggage that slowed you down and that most people packed out of habit rather than necessity. He had gone to the branch, seen what needed to be seen, made the call and moved on. The thing he thought about more, on the quiet evenings when he sat on the porch of the farmhouse his grandfather had built, watching the light go flat across the ridgeline, was the question his granddaughter Lily had asked him when she heard the story from her mother. Lily was 9 years old and had the specific directness that some children have before they learn to soften their questions for the comfort of the adults they are asking. She had said, "Granddad, how come you didn't just tell them who you were right away?" He had thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Because who I am isn't something I need to announce." Lily had looked at him with the expression children make when they are deciding whether the answer makes sense. Then she said, "But it would have been faster." And Clifford had laughed. The low, rare laugh that his daughter said sounded like the engine of the old Ford, turning over in the cold, reluctant and genuine at the same time. He told her she was right. It would have been faster. But faster was not always the thing you were after. Some things had to be seen plainly, without explanation, to be understood at all. The farmhouse still stood on the same ridge where his grandfather had built it, and Clifford had no plans to move. The land was paid for, the cattle were healthy, the leases were running well, and the quarterly reports from Cornerstone continued to arrive in his mailbox, which he continued to read carefully, at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and no particular urgency. He was not a man who needed the world to know what he had built. He had built it for the same reason his grandfather had cleared that ridge, because there was work to be done, and he was the one standing in front of it. But there were people sometimes who needed to be reminded that the man in the flannel shirt had been standing in front of more than they could see. And when the reminder was necessary, Clifford Harmon had learned that a manila envelope, placed quietly on a desk, spoke more plainly than anything he could have said standing up. In the end, this was never a story about a bank or a shareholder report or a branch manager's career. It was a story about the oldest and most persistent mistake that people make, the mistake of measuring a person by the outside of them and missing everything that counts. The world is full of people who built something real with their hands and their patience and their decades of unglamorous, consistent work. People who wake up before sunrise, who skip vacations, who drive trucks with 200,000 miles on the engine because the money goes back into the operation and not into appearances. Those people will never dress the part that the world expects them to dress to be taken seriously, and they have long since made their peace with that. And the world keeps being surprised by them, over and over again, because it has not learned the lesson that those people stopped needing to learn a long time ago. The surprise, every single time, belongs entirely to the person who made the assumption. Clifford Harmon had never needed anyone to see what he had built. He had only ever needed to build it. And he had. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and share it with someone who needed to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what you had built? I want to read every single one.